Title: She was sleeping in row 10, when the captain asked, "Any combat pilots on board?" The flight was halfway between London and New York when the turbulence began, not the kind that rattles your drink, but the kind that shifts the silence of an entire plane. Somewhere over the Atlantic, passengers jolted awake as the aircraft shuddered through a violent drop. Row 10, Seat B, a young woman in a hoodie stirred, rubbing her eyes. Her name was Captain Rebecca Hale, U.S. Air Force, retired. Call sign: Falcon. She hadn't flown in 2 years, not since the mission over Kandahar that left her wingman's seat empty forever. She'd learned to find peace on the ground, or at least tried to. The seatbelt sign blinked on. An announcement crackled over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected technical difficulties. Please remain seated." The tremor in his voice wasn't turbulence. It was fear. Rebecca leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She caught the look between the flight attendants, the silent panic they were trying to mask with smiles. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. A minute later, the captain's voice came again, tighter this time. "If there are any trained pilots or aviation personnel on board, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." Gasps. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Rebecca froze. That sentence, "any pilots on board," was one she'd only heard in movies. She pulled off her hoodie, and the dog tag around her neck glinted in the low cabin light. She hesitated for a heartbeat. She'd promised herself never to step into a cockpit again. But then the aircraft shuddered again, a deep metallic groan that made the overhead bins rattle. That sound, she knew it. Compressor stall. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Excuse me," she said to the startled businessman beside her. "I think they need me." The flight attendant near the galley saw her approaching. "Ma'am, please sit down, I'm a pilot," Rebecca said calmly. "Air Force, F-22 Raptors. I heard the captain's call." The attendant's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Rebecca flashed her ID card, still clipped to the inside of her wallet. "Very." Within seconds, she was being ushered down the aisle toward the cockpit, passengers watching her like a soldier walking toward a battlefield. When the cockpit door opened, the first thing she saw was smoke, thin, gray, and coming from the avionics panel. The co-pilot's seat was empty, and the captain was pale, gripping the yoke with trembling hands. He turned, startled. "You're the combat pilot, Rebecca Hale," she said, climbing into the co-pilot's chair. "What's the situation?" He coughed. "Electrical failure. We've lost half our avionics and both autopilots. I can't get reliable altitude readings." Rebecca scanned the instruments, dead screens, flickering indicators. She'd seen worse, in the desert, under fire. "We can work with this." "What's our fuel?" 30%. "We're diverting toward Newfoundland, but navigation's glitching." "Manual flight it is," she said, taking the secondary yoke. "You keep comms, I'll fly." The captain nodded, relief flashing in his eyes. Together, they steadied the aircraft, working through the emergency checklist like old comrades. Rebecca's hands moved instinctively, adjusting trim, compensating for drag, eyes flicking between analog backups. "Who trained you?" he asked between shallow breaths. "Edwards Air Force Base. Raptors, mostly. But I flew some commercial sims before I quit." "Quit? Long story," she said. "Let's just say I had reasons." The cabin shook again, and a warning light flared, engine 2 pressure low. Rebecca's voice hardened. "We're losing thrust." The captain's knuckles whitened. "If we lose that engine, then we glide," she said. "I've done worse with less." She reached for the throttles, balancing power distribution, coaxing the plane like a wounded bird through crosswinds and dark clouds. Her focus narrowed. Nothing existed except airspeed, horizon, and survival. In the cabin, the passengers sat in tense silence. Row 10 was empty now, the seatbelt still unbuckled. A child whispered to her mother, "Is the pilot lady going to save us?" The mother squeezed her hand. "Yes, sweetheart, she is." Inside the cockpit, minutes felt like hours. Rebecca and the captain coordinated with air traffic control, but radio signals were fading. Static filled their ears. Then the captain's headset crackled. "Flight 327, we've lost radar contact." "Do you copy?" Rebecca leaned in. "Control, this is Flight 327, co-pilot Rebecca Hale. We've got a partial avionics failure and engine 2 pressure drop. Declaring emergency, heading 285 for Gander." The operator paused. Hail. As in Falcon 1. Rebecca blinked. You know that name. You flew Kandahar, 18, didn't you? You saved 6 Raptors when comms died. The captain looked at her in shock. That was you. Rebecca didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. Let's keep her level. The storm broke around them, lightning flickering across the wings. Rebecca steadied the plane through the turbulence, each movement smooth and precise. The old instincts had returned, calm, controlled, unbreakable. Altitude stable, she said. We'll make it to Gander. The captain exhaled. You sure? She looked out at the night sky, streaks of silver and blue reflected on the ocean below. I've seen worse skies than this. They broke through the clouds at 6,000 feet, runway lights glimmering in the distance. Gander International Control cleared them for emergency landing. Your plane, the captain said. Rebecca shook her head. Our plane. They brought the aircraft down in near silence, one engine coughing, hydraulics sluggish, but her hands were steady on the yoke. The wheels kissed the tarmac, gentle as a whisper. The cabin erupted in applause, sobs, and relief. For the first time in years, Rebecca smiled. As they taxied to a stop, the captain turned to her, his eyes shining. You just saved 200 lives. She unbuckled, glancing out at the flashing lights of the rescue vehicles. I just did my job. When she stepped out of the cockpit, the passengers stood, clapping, cheering, some even crying. A little boy from row 10 ran up and hugged her leg. You were the one sleeping in row 10, he said. Rebecca laughed softly. Guess I picked the right seat. The flight attendants surrounded her, one of them holding back tears. Captain Hale, thank you. She shrugged. Just glad I woke up in time. Hours later, as dawn crept over the Newfoundland coast, Rebecca sat by the terminal window with a cup of coffee. The storm was gone. The plane she'd landed sat quiet on the tarmac, battered but whole. The airline's chief pilot approached her. We looked you up. You really are Falcon 1. The Air Force legend. Rebecca looked away. I'm not that anymore. He smiled. After tonight, I think you just proved otherwise. She chuckled softly. Maybe. But let's keep that between us. He nodded. Of course. Then, after a pause, you ever think of flying again? Rebecca looked out at the sunrise, the sky painted gold. Every day, she said. But tonight reminded me why I loved it, and why I stopped. He tilted his head. Because of fear. No, she said quietly. Because I thought I'd lost my purpose. But maybe purpose finds you, even in row 10. She stood, slinging her jacket over her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the world was bright again. And for the first time in years, so was she. Description. When a transatlantic flight loses power midair, panic spreads through the cabin, until a woman in row 10 quietly stands up. Captain Rebecca, Falcon, Hale, a former U.S. Air Force combat pilot, hasn't flown in years. But when the captain calls for help, she steps into the cockpit once more, and what happens next becomes legend. Hashtags. Hashtag states of history. Hashtag Air Force legend. Hashtag true hero. Hashtag aviation courage. Hashtag women of valor. Hashtag pilot story. Hashtag hero in the sky. Flight 327. Hashtag Falcon 1. Hashtag cinematic story. Keywords. Female pilot story, Air Force legend, aviation hero, emergency landing story, true courage, military women, pilot saves flight, cinematic storytelling, flight emergency, inspiring hero story.